The panel we'll have now is actually an extension of what Kim was talking about. So we'll dive into one of the most important questions in the future of scientific discovery, which is how do we build trust into this whole stack that, Kim, you went through now, from the ground up, from the knowledge to LLMs and anything in between. And to do that, we'll invite two other panelists that I'm really looking forward to talking to you as well. So we have Noémi Friedman. She's the lead researcher at the AI laboratory at HUN-REN SZTAKI. So thank you, Noémi. Round of applause. And we have Philipp Christmann. He's a researcher working on agentic AI at the CISPA Helmholtz Center for Information Security. So Philipp brings the security angle. Thank you. Fantastic. And just also take a quick seat. Great to have you, all three of you here. And maybe we just start with a quick round of introductions for Kim. You already introduced yourself, so maybe Noémi and Philipp. Minute each.
Should I start?
Absolutely, ladies first.
So first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's a really great event. 2 years ago, I was also part of this event, and it's so much inspiration coming on. So my name is Noémi Friedman. I'm somewhat of an outlier here because I'm a civil engineer. So per diploma, I have a degree in structural engineering, constructing bridges and buildings, but I work for a laboratory of artificial intelligence. And I'm here to share all the thoughts.
Great, thank you, Noémi. Looking forward to the discussion. Philipp, go ahead.
Also from my side, thanks a lot for having me. Very interesting talks already. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So my name is Philipp Christmann. I am a researcher at the CISPA Helmholtz Center for Information Security. And my background is really pure research and AI-driven. So I was working on knowledge graphs, also in combination with language models, since about 2019-20. And my PhD work was also on integrating knowledge graphs together with textual sources into the process for answering questions.
Great, thanks for the quick introduction. And maybe we start with a more of a high-level general question to each of you, since you all have a slightly different background and perspective. And I'm really interested in hearing this. Kim, you already kind of went into that. Partially answered the question, but so we have this scientific stack that is evolving fast, right? So you said people were Googling things. Now it's asking LLMs and not having really the source of the answer. So you could say the trust into the whole process by using AI is degrading in a way. What does a trusted stack look like for each of you when we're talking about scientific research, using agents, using agentic AI? What does it mean? What does it mean that something, the stack, the process is trusted in the area of science?
Well, what I presented definitely summarizes it. So we need verifiable and trusted sources in the first instance. The data from those sources need to be extracted properly and converted into knowledge. That's a challenge. Another problem that we face is the heterogeneity of data. So it's the file types, in part, that provide those data, but it's also the multiple sources of data and the types of data. So we've got data in text, we've got genomic data, we've got proteomic data, we've got molecular data. So integrating all those data into one place that is interoperable is going to be super important for trusted AI.
I would say in engineering, it's pretty much the same thing. Maybe something that's also important that usually people who own the data or who create the data, they have additional context. And it's super great if this context can be shared in as big detail as possible. So I'm a big fan of representing all the uncertainties that goes with data. If the data comes from measurements, then we know what is the measurement device that was used and what is the accuracy of the measurement device that was used. And all this description of the situation and the context can really help that data scientists to represent the data together with this context.
And this ties in well with what, Kim, you said of vectors just being lossy representation of documents, lose a lot of context, right? And graphs providing a lot more of that context that is around. Of course, somebody needs to put it in the graph, which is something we have already touched about, but we'll talk about more. But that's a very valid point.
And it's not just the metadata around those data. What you're talking about in terms of uncertainty is super important. The answers to that example question always gave a hard and fast answer, but that's not how things work. Where are the standard deviations or confidence intervals? We need to know that to make informed choices.
Exactly.
So one point that I would like also to add, because I think that was also covered quite well in what you presented, or you can incorporate it quite well, is this scrutinability of the knowledge that you have. So once you put it in a knowledge graph, you have it in symbolic space, and you're also able to verify this with a human in the loop. So there's a way of a human expert to really look at what information was extracted and verify the correctness. And that is often not the case in RAG baselines or RAG practices, how they are employed today. So I think that is also a very important factor, essentially, where in the stack to bring in the human in the loop and really verify whatever was produced is also correct.
And that was a very important thing also for you, right, Kim? Like bringing the human in the loop, not only with the extraction of data, but also with the creation, making sure that we get the right triples in there, that we don't make mistakes, because then if you retrieve something that is wrong, obviously then the LLM, the agent, will have done its job, but it will have done it wrong because it has wrong foundations.
And then we're back to square one, which is those wobbly and fuzzy foundations. So yeah, the ability to check side by side is really important. It's going to lead to issues of scale, but while we're doing this proof of concept, we'll start to see where errors arise and deal with them while we're working at small scale. Because some of the biggest challenges you would think are the easiest to solve, but they're not. And you know, the extraction from PDFs, for example, because PDFs look beautiful to read, a scientific publication, but they're just horrible. To pull the data out is, in a context-aware fashion, is actually quite tough, particularly around tabular data with split cells and merged rows, and it's not a solved problem.
You make a good point also about scalability, and I think we can go back to that in a little bit, where decentralization can help also with that, keeping the humans in the loop, because I think we have talked about this a little bit. But maybe since we're talking about also from a security point of view, from a security perspective, right? We're talking in scientific research, we're often talking about data that is extremely sensitive, right? Patient data, genomic profiles. So Philipp, maybe a question for you. You work from us, you are involved in research related to security of information. What are the key things that kind of, let's say, worry you, keep you awake at night when thinking about such systems, right? When we're talking about agentic AI being able to access such data, and how do we prevent that or mitigate it or make it work?
Yeah, that's a very important question, definitely. So I think one very important aspect is access control, that you really verify that only the users that are allowed to utilize or access a different data set are really also given access to the specific data. And the secondary aspect that is also well covered in, of course, the DKG is the one of being attributable, so the authorship, but also being able to trace back who made the finding, who put this knowledge into the knowledge graph, or who was responsible for a specific snippet. And I think that this is very important, especially also nowadays in the internet, referring also to some of the previous discussions, as more and more information is created by AI itself, and that can lead to this reinforcing loop of AI processing AI content, essentially. So those are, from my perspective, I think, some of the most important aspects when it comes to security.
Yeah, and I think it's a very important thing to consider, because it's very easy to forget that aspect, right? To give, okay, agents can do wonders, they have access to all of this data, but then all of a sudden you have sensitive information leaks, and your genomic profiles being available on the public space, public spheres. It's not something that, right, that we want to do.
Something we'll need to think about. Not data sources we're worried about yet, but I can envisage a time when we might, which is thinking about individual patient-level data. So electronic health records, for example, are a wealth of information for safety and efficacy. So we need to be secure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
I think in this area, it's also interesting to see how strategies like differential privacy maybe could also join in with concepts like blockchain technology to really verify that you can share information across different decentralized agents, or also among patients, and draw conclusions, statistical conclusions, without really having access to the pure and raw data. So still ensuring privacy in this area.
And I think this brings us to a very interesting point, because we have the security aspect to consider, right? But as we have agents now, whatever type they might be, as we have them becoming more, let's say, active participants, right? It's not just you asking questions. We have agents that are being deployed to do research, to come to conclusions, to form hypotheses, and so on and so forth. How do we ensure that there is, with humans, it's relatively easy. There's always somebody who's accountable, right? Now, if we deploy a swarm of 50 or 1,000 agents to perform research, how do we ensure and somehow track that accountability, and that, ensure that standards of scientific research are somehow met throughout this thing? Because we very easily, that's something that we can forget, right? It's very tempting, I guess, to say, okay, I can replace a scientific researcher with 1,000 agents to do this instead of them. But there are risks to this. Not targeted to any of you and specifically, but to all of you at the same time.
Is this for me?
That's what I meant. Yeah, it's not targeted, but I think it's a relevant question for each of you. Yeah.
I'm looking at my phone because I wrote a quote from Oliver Cromwell, who said, "I beseech you in the bowels of Christ, think it possible that you may be mistaken." So I think this is a great quote to say that human beings, engineers, when they make physics-based models, they are often mistaken. They have to cross-check the solutions, what they have. And now in the era of AI, this is like exponentially growing. As we saw the presentation of Chris, there are so huge risks that we are facing, not just in trusting AI models, but also their social effects, that this is something that needs to be somehow revised and rethought and so on. So what I'm working on is making probabilistic models, so considering all the related uncertainties. So there are many different types of uncertainties. One is that we talked about, we need secured data, and we need exact data, as much accurate as much possible, but we know that, I don't know whoever worked with data here and data-driven models, when it comes to real data, the data is always shitty. Sorry for the word, but it's full of garbage. And some quotes were told by us in big data analysis that often 90% of the job is to clean the data. So you need to know all these related uncertainties in the data that you're handling. And then when you model, there are two different types of uncertainties. One is called epistemic and the other is called aleatoric. So one is because sometimes you do not have sufficient information, as the data is often limited. then your model tries to learn something and then extrapolates or interpolates in between. So that's when it comes to hallucinations in language models, or that's when it comes to some predictions that completely unreliable. So the other type of uncertainty is something that was mentioned by Giga. There's no ministry of truth, right? So sometimes models learn from contradictory data. So sometimes some stuff are black, some stuff are white, depending on the source. But even in engineering system, if you try to somehow infer knowledge from measurements, then there are different outcomes that can reside in the same measured data. And you have to be aware of all these related uncertainties. So what we work on is to model these and try to identify all these uncertainties. So that's one way to
no, it's a very
handle.
interesting thing. So how would that translate into? So you mentioned the probabilistic modeling and I think uncertainty-aware models. So is not the end game, but is the next evolution of agents that are, they're based on knowledge graph, but also the agents themselves, the LLMs, they don't answer black or white, and then they change their answer 15 times when you go through, but rather something that is more like, this is the confidence interval that I have in this answer that I provided, and here are the other possible outcomes. Is that where you see this going, or helping the scientific agents to do better
Yes,
work?
exactly. Or giving you the different possible outcomes, the whole distribution. And then there are different levels of uncertainty. So maybe you get a distribution and you also get the uncertainty of the distribution. So you can go as high as possible. But first, we would just like to get this variability and confidence intervals that comes with your prediction or your language.
I think we have to consider what we're dealing with an LLM as well. In that, my perception of them is that they are just very good next token prediction machines, next word, if you like. So they're creating for every next token a probability distribution over words. Well, I'm not sure we should be dealing with probability. You mentioned reasoning, so we have reasoning LLMs. I'm not convinced they actually reason. You ask for a chain of thought and it gives you one. Really? Is it not post hoc reasoning? I'm not sure that it came first. But with RDF, for example, you have an actual reasoning chain. So if a drug is recommended, you can trace it through to the target. So that's a protein, to the RNA, to the DNA, to the pathway it sits in. So you actually have reasoning.
I think actually you mentioned it. Sorry, Philipp, I'll let you go in a sec, but this reasoning is just a thought from my side. It's very interesting that reasoning is so often associated with LLMs when it really should be associated with the graphs, right? That's where reasoning comes from. You can define rules in a graph where connections that are not explicit can be made, and that's how we progress. But somehow the LLMs hijacked, right, the reasoning. They give it the perception of reasoning, and that's a very interesting problem to solve. I mean, we clearly believe in the graphs, we're working on it. But just as a kind of a side note, never really thought about LLMs taking them word for themselves. Sorry, Philipp, you wanted to add something, yeah?
No worries. I really wanted to add on this comment regarding language models being mostly also next token predictors, because that's also how it started. Since I did my PhD during this time, I was very close to also all these developments. And initially, it was really just a language model, but then more and more as they scaled, more and more knowledge really went also into these huge language models, which they are technically not meant for. And only 2023, 2024, people really started to move more and more again back to retrieval augmented generation, which was already around before. And nowadays, what I've also heard from one of the major NLP conferences, ACL, that was just happening, and EMNLP, is that the models are getting smaller and smaller again, outsourcing essentially the knowledge back to knowledge repositories that can then be verified. And I think that's a very good and interesting direction, and that is really also the right direction to take here.
And that's a very good point, and maybe a follow-up question to do. And we spoke about this earlier, right? All of these risks that we need to consider with RAG, with the whole stack, the process. What do you see as the largest risks? And we'll switch, I think, after this one to the decentralization and how that what role that plays. But what are the biggest risks that you see, or failure modes also, as we move towards this discovery? Is it something we already covered? You want to highlight something else?
Yeah, I think one of the major risks is definitely the data underlying the inference. But at the same point, it's also the model that gives users always the false sense of correctness. So even if the answer is incorrect, it would look perfectly correct. And actually what happens also in many of these reasoning trails is that what the model does and says it does is far away from its actual inference. So that was also found in different papers, and that really makes also the trustworthiness of the process questionable. So even though the model spits out something that it should have done probably, it's not always faithful to what has actually been computed internally. And I think that is really an important part where also the research community should work on and should put way more focus on.
So we have LLMs that are people pleasers, essentially, right? They tell you what I want to do, even though you're might be completely confused or lost. And this is one of the things we have to tackle. It's a very good point. And maybe actually now we talked about the risks, we talked about the potentials, like where technology such as the graphs can help. We didn't touch so much on the decentralization part. And I think, so I said we'd get back to the topic of ensuring data ingestion quality control, if you will. And that's something we'll have to figure out as we scale. What are your thoughts on how decentralization and incentives the role that they can play in ensuring that we're able to scale this, right? Because there are people, obviously, there are a lot of scientists in the world, a lot of researchers in the world. Can decentralization and incentivization help in some way to activate them, to help create graphs that are fantastic, rich, they have all the context that they need. Agents are able to then extract them in a secure way. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a challenge, particularly in pharma, because they're businesses. So there are financial concerns, competitive concerns. So part of making this work will be hopefully reminding people that the reason a pharma company exists is not just to make money, but it's about global health. It's about the patient. So that argument needs to be presented convincingly. Decentralization will also be important in that at the moment, as I mentioned, data are just all over the place. So certain people are in control of certain data sets. It needs bringing together so that actual new insights can be generated. Because if you've got geneticists with their data set, you've got molecular biologists working on RNA, you've got imaging experts, insights are going to be missed because people are working in those silos. But what if certain pointers in each data set kind of accumulate to a new insight that you just would not spot looking at these data sets separately? That's why data needs to come together.
That's where also reasoning then plays a role, right? Once we have a graph or multiple graphs of a certain size, then the reasoning that we can apply can produce not only RAG, right, and then answer based on the knowledge that we extract from the graph, but actually conclude new things, new insights that we might not be able to see before.
Yeah, which might be driven through semantic reasoning. So we encode the rules of the biological domain, and so we have symbolic reasoning. But then we can also introduce again, neurosymbolic approaches, so graph embeddings, and maybe new knowledge will be derived from graph embeddings.
Yeah, there is a very cool. I think we'll talk about this also in future. So later in the program, there is a lot of new and exciting things around neural graph databases, embeddings, and all these things. So definitely exciting movement there. But it is maybe just for people who don't understand what reasoning is. I'll use the example Branimir always uses with Socrates. Is right, if you have a knowledge graph where you say Socrates is a human and human is mortal, then you can have a reasoning rule that that would conclude, even though there is no direct connection between Socrates is mortal, that graph would make that reasoning conclusion, and you would have some additional insight that you didn't have. So that's just a very simple example. Obviously, the rules can be a lot more comprehensive and helpful in the domain of scientific research data. But it's a very I'm looking forward for us to explore also these techniques as we progress with the project. Follow-up question. Oh yeah, it was actually a question for you, Noémi. So, but go ahead.
But maybe go ahead with the question.
Well, it was we're talking about. So I know I have a note here. You work also a lot with digital twins and data-driven simulations. And the follow-up question on this decentralization was, how can decentralized knowledge, that coming from many participants in a supply network or whatever type of things are. I say supply network because I know you also work a lot in construction, right? You have a lot of experience there. We've worked on the build chain projects together. How does such verifiable knowledge impact these more advanced, let's say, simulation, digital twins, and the likes?
Yeah, so I try to put together all the dots that you asked. So the build chain project is it's about storing building-related data. So I don't know if you're aware of it, but 40% of the energy consumption in Europe is because of the construction industry. So there's huge amount of energy that's going to that. And construction industry is a bit different from health-related data. So I think the problem with health-related data is that it's extremely sensitive sort of data, and because of GDPR, it's just so difficult to manage to collect data and share this knowledge, so to come to really crucial conclusions and research. In construction, I'm not sure. The industry is afraid of digitalization and transferability as well. So we often talk about traceability and transparency in related to decentralized knowledge graphs. And usually stakeholders are not really big fan of transparency, because then it discovers some hidden facts that the stakeholders
they were naughty, yes.
It's not their it's not really their interest to discover those. So before initiating this build chain project, I was into this digital twinning idea that you can put together a physics-based model of a critical building or a bridge, and then use data, experimental data, what's happening with the actual structure, and then improve your physics-based model based on that, and keeping track in how the structure is aging, what's happening with the building. Or even just after construction, whether the design procedure was the right one. Did I get really the properties of the building that I needed to get? And then my friend from the construction industry told me, hey, Noémi, this idea is completely bad. No one would want to do this. No one in the construction sector would want transferability, how an as-designed and as-built model would be compared to each other. So that goes against stakeholder needs, I would say. But certainly when it comes to research, when you have a base knowledge which is structured and that can be shared, there are so many procedures that we do in the construction sector that are repeated again and again, and people different are doing very similar experiments to come up with some generalizable solution. if these experiments could be put together, the same like in health, if you could see this knowledge, if they are discoverable, maybe not publicly shared because it may be sensitive, but at least researchers are aware of it, or engineers are aware of it, that such data was produced, and it may be accessible if you can find the source and contact the source and use this system to exchange data and then really behave like a society and build knowledge together. That would be really ideal.
I'm just thinking that probably in the next panel that Ken and John and Mary will probably have a similar observation about not wanting transparency in the industry due to certain things not being, they don't want certain things to be visible. Scientific research is hopefully has a slightly different mentality, at least from my, let's say, non-participative perspective, but it's very curious that we are dealing with problems like this instead of helping make the world a better place. If that's a very broad statement, but yeah,
there is a problem in science, and that is if you have negative results, it's really hard to get them published.
Yeah.
So publication bias is a real problem. But as a scientist, I would like to know if an experiment I'm about to do has already failed.
At least you put it on some knowledge graph.
Okay. Well, I guess that's also an area where decentralization can drive some additional value.
And maybe that's also a risk of, say, agent-driven scientific discovery, because relating also to what I said earlier, this transparency and faithfulness to its actual inference, if they are trained to provide good research papers, they could also be misaligned and somehow write research papers that are not in line with their actual experimental findings. So I think that's also a very important aspect there. So from that perspective, I think it's really crucial to have the human in the loop at various stages and really verify the correctness of all the findings.
Yeah, it takes me back to Chris's presentation and show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome, right? So it's all about how we put the incentives in place for scientists to want to share, and they're incentivized to share also the failures, obviously, so because that also helps with further research, right? And we have a growing graph of only positive things. That's a pretty bad bias, I would say.
Something I was talking to Tomasz about is, so there's a wealth of knowledge in clinicians who are actually prescribing medicine to patients. What if we could incentivize those clinicians to interact with the data on the graph and provide their real-world opinions? That adds more value.
Yeah, that's where I was also going with that question on, what are the ways from a decentralization and incentivization perspective that we can involve. We're talking about human in the loop, right? So the way we keep human in the loop is we incentivize them, right, to do certain things. And I think those mechanisms are extremely important. We have 7 minutes left. I think we probably should open up also the floor for a question or two, but maybe a quick half a minute closing thought from each of you, if you have some. Otherwise, we can also move to the questions. But I'm sure we talked about a lot of things, right? We talked about what does trusted scientific stack look like, what are the risks, what are the potentials, how decentralization can help. If you have some closing thoughts, summaries you'd like to share, I invite you to do so.
I suppose closing thought is knowledge graphs have been around for decades, but it's been a struggle. So I'm not anti-LLMs by any stretch. I feel that now the time is right to integrate the two. So LLMs can help us build the graph, LLMs can help us query the graph, but we've got to get it right. Because to scale this, we need the LLMs to help us construct the graph. And it's going to be hard, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Great, that's a very valid point, yeah. Noémi, Philipp.
Yeah, so I think decentralized knowledge graph is a great technology, and maybe sometimes technology just forces people, even if there's a contra need for stakeholders, at least we can build this sort of knowledge and then it will bring incentives as well. That's one thing. And then I think it's very extremely important that whenever you use AI, we heard the talk of Chris, it was quite depressing for me. I always ask myself whether I'm responsible for the disaster that's going to come in years, maybe. But I try to tell myself in engineering, it feels more safe than when you go into language models. I don't know how is it. What do you think? Yeah, but we have to consider all these uncertainties. I think it's very important. There are new technologies like probabilistic models and explainable models that try to go behind the black box model and see how much you can trust your output and try to see what are the reasoning behind the model, which is not an easy topic and it's not fully discovered yet, but I think this direction is good to make these technologies a bit safer and trustable. And I really like to believe there are so big potentials of collecting all these knowledges and working together with different scientists. It would bring also good things, not just very bad societal effects.
We're certainly working on that, yes.
Yeah, so maybe I can jump in there because I think there was already one project by Google, also the Alpha Evolve project, where they really showed that in a formal setup like math and also computer science, there are already ways of including AI, and they included it and improved Google internal computational infrastructure. They improved certain mathematical optimization problems that haven't been improved for 80 years. So that was already quite impressive. And if we can really put in correct and factually correct knowledge into this process from interdisciplinary areas, I think that is really a very interesting direction of future research, how to really cross these different fields and draw conclusions that are probably then making an impact.
And we've pretty much then ended back at connectivity and Metcalfe's law, right? The more we can connect knowledge, the more value we can extract for everyone. So I think that's a very good conclusion. We have 3 minutes left. Do we have maybe any questions from the crowd? Raise your hand and the mic will appear, I guess. No? Oh.
Okay.
Tomasz has a question, yeah.
I turned it on. Hi. Thanks for a very exciting conversation. There was one thing that Kim mentioned around how there's a point in making sure that the general population knows that the pharmaceutical companies are out there to actually make the patients' lives better, not just to haul up the world's capital. And I think that's a very important point. It goes to how can we make not just the pharmaceutical products, but also the technology more widely available. So I'm interested in hearing your guys' thoughts on what does the edge look like, or how does technology get applied across billions of people? How is it available for them? Is this something that is focused on bringing more capabilities to our devices, to our wearables, or using that data somehow? Or is it more of a top-down thing where we'll have the 5-6 companies like raking up the foundational models to the next extreme, and we'll all rely on that? So yeah, I think you all have such a nicely diverse point of view. I'd be keen to hear just a brief thought from all of you. Thanks.
Well, I suppose to start with, so we've started the pilot with UCB, and as I mentioned to you earlier, we're really fortunate that they came on board because we kind of sold an idea, a dream, which is difficult. But now that we have the fledglings of something that works, getting other pharma companies on board should be easier. And I think we can get pharma to work collaboratively as well, because transparency is important to pharma. And in terms of getting this out to users outside pharma, so patients, clinicians, I think we need to develop partnerships with people who are creating agents or tools to interact with the data that we and the pharma companies provide on the graph. So some of those tools that I mentioned, they're pulling data from like PubMed, for example, at the moment, but that could be different. It could be the knowledge graph, the DKG. So I think that's part of what we need to crack.
I think there are different directions in this domain. In SZTAKI, in the institute where I work, they have this big group working on longevity studies. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's very promising for us as individuals to know how do you prolongate your life. And I think doctors are always overwhelmed, and there are so many tests that could be done to avoid some sicknesses or just notice them in time. And I think all these applications using this sort of data, comparing your biological age and your true age, it's now a big hype. And what sort of supplements to take, which I don't know. I think it's a nasty industry, right?
It's a bit messy. It's not necessarily evidence-based.
It's not necessarily evidence-based, but they do a lot of research actually on this domain. So maybe it won't be only the commercials, but some scientific background discovered related to that.
Makes sense, makes sense. Yeah, Philipp, did you want to add something? We're slightly over, but I think we have 30 seconds to...
Oh,
I see Anna looking at me. Yes,
zero.
yeah, zero. Big red zeros. Go ahead, I think.
Okay, I would just add from the technology perspective, I think that in the long run, we would see language models more, or foundation models more and more running on the end user devices, because it's also better for the companies, because I think still OpenAI doesn't make profit, and they won't make profit with running their thousands, millions of user queries all the time on their machines. So I think there's some incentive also for them running the models on the user machines, and then probably that's also good from a privacy perspective, and how to have these different agents then interact with each other will be also another interesting research area probably first.
Great, great. Then, I mean, we have more time in the breaks to discuss more if anyone has more questions. But I'd like to thank all three of you. That was a very interesting and stimulating discussion. And yeah, I think we're going in the right direction. It's just we need to push. So thank you all for joining.